Hey guys, I just wanted to make this video because if you were in the earlier class, you know that there were a lot of problems with the videos that we tried to watch. A lot of little tech issues there, and I do apologize, but I have fixed them. So now we are going to just do another recording. So in this recording, I'm just going to go through the notes with you as we did in class. That way you have the important information you need to do well on your lessons. We started with a review question about pyramids, just trying to remember what the pyramids were used for. So why did the Egyptians build the pyramids? The answer was letter choice B. They were built to serve as tombs for royalty and as homes for the next life. So they were not homes for the gods as the ziggurats were in Sumer. They were there for graves for the royalty and as passage to the other life as they believed. Now just remember that this week, if you're an honors student, your honors project is due on Friday. You do need to complete lessons 4 through 7 in Unit 4. And in your student guide, that's going to be about pages 100 to 110. And in your textbook, about pages 109 to 123. So make sure you do read that information carefully. Now, when we talk about Egyptian history, ancient Egyptian history, is divided into 3 main time periods. And we call these periods the kingdoms of ancient Egypt. And they are the 3 most important periods in history of ancient Egypt because that's where most of Egyptian culture and history and civilization comes from, these 3 periods. We don't give them super imaginative names. Basically, they are the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom. But before the Old Kingdom started, Egypt was divided. It was divided into an Upper Egypt and a Lower Egypt. And they were divided, and so division is also going to cause instability, and it's not going to be a very strong civilization. But when they were united during the Old Kingdom, then Egyptian history becomes a lot stronger. Now, as you can see in this map, or on this map, here is Egypt as it is, now. This is the Egyptian country. If we zoom in to where the kingdoms were at that time, you'll see that the purple represents the Old Kingdom. It's large, but not as large as some of the other colors. So the Old Kingdom starts out small. Then in the Middle Kingdom time period, it goes a little bit bigger, which is represented by the red. The red, includes the purple and the red areas, or orange. Not sure which one it is. And then in the New Kingdom, we see even more territory. Over here to the east, or the northeast, we see some more territory. To the southwest, we see more territory. So it just continues to grow. So of course, as each kingdom moves along, we're going to see a progression. We're going to see growth of the nation as well. And we are going to watch a video that's going to kind of summarize or kind of give you the overview, the main points of the Old Kingdom. And while you're watching the video, just make sure you think to yourself about this question, because this question is important. What structures were built during the old Egyptian kingdom? So we're going to answer that question in just a second. But let's watch this video to get a little bit more information about this topic.
History into 3 broad categories, each with their own numbered dynasties. But only hardcore Egyptologists know the dynasties, and we're not trying to become hardcore Egyptologists. The Old Kingdom lasted from 2649 to 2152, the Middle Kingdom from 2040 to 1640, and the New Kingdom, so-called because it is only 3,000 years old, lasted from 1550 to 1070 BCE. In between, you have a couple so-called intermediate periods. Okay, Old Kingdom. This was really the glory age of ancient Egypt, when you got all the stuff that would later make Indiana Jones possible, like the pyramids at Giza and the Sun King Ra and the idea of divine kingship. The king, or pharaoh, was either a god or very close to a god, which seems like a good gig, except that it meant he wasn't expected to act like a person, he was expected to act like a god, which in ancient Egypt means acting like the Nile. Calm, cool, benevolent. There's no fun in that. And then, of course, there are the pyramids, which, aside from remaining impressive to behold, represent a remarkable degree of political and social control over the population. Because it is not easy to convince people to devote their lives to building a sarcophagus for someone else. The most famous pyramids were built between 2575 and 2465 BCE. The one with the Sphinx was built for Khephren. The largest, the Great Pyramid, was built for the pharaoh Khufu. The pyramids were built partly by peasants who were required by Egyptian law to work for the government a certain number of months per year, and partly by slaves, but not by Moses and the Jews, who showed up on the scene long before the pyramids were ever even a twinkle in Khufu's eye. This leads to an overwhelming question. Why? Why in the sweet name of Ra would anyone ever build such a thing? Old Kingdom Egypt was also remarkably literate. They had two forms of writing, hieroglyphics for sacred writing, and then Demotic script for recording contracts and agreements and other boring stuff. The last thing I want to say about Old Kingdom Egypt, it was ridiculously rich. But then, around 2250 BCE, there were a series of droughts and pharaohs started fighting over who should have power, and we had an intermediate period.
In that video, we did hear a lot about the old Egyptian kingdom, and hopefully you picked up on the fact that the answer to this question, the structures built during the old Egyptian kingdom, is the Pyramid of Giza, along with pretty much all of the other pyramids that we see today in Egypt that have existed since then. They all were built during this time period, because this was a time period of showing off wealth and showing off how wonderful and important old Egypt was. Excuse me. So here we have an overview of the Old Kingdom. So remember, the Old Kingdom was a time when the upper and lower portions of Egypt were united. The Old Kingdom did have a strong central government, so that was a great thing for them at the time. During this period, Khufu's Great Pyramid and the other pyramids at Giza were built, which was the answer to the question that we just looked at. But also during this period, they came up with the process of embalming or mummifying bodies, which is very important to what we also know about their history. And we should know that Egypt was very rich and prosperous at this time. So it was really a great time for Egypt. They were developing into a strong civilization. Nothing seemed to be where it would harm them or hurt them in any way. But of course, we know human nature is that most of the time people are not just 100% happy with what they have. They always have that mentality of, I want more, more, more. And so that's kind of what happened here. So after several hundreds of years of prosperity, it didn't happen overnight, but after several hundred of years of prosperity, we hit the Middle Kingdom, which was a period during which Egypt decided they needed to expand their reach. They needed to go out and have wars and gain more territory and more riches, and they just wanted more, more, more. So they did conquer territory to the south, such as a little, place called Nubia. They still had great wealth and prosperity, but in the end, remember we talked about this with, with empires, and when we discussed empires, is that empires are great, but the more land you have, the more difficult it is to control, because not only are you constantly fighting in wars in order to keep your land, but it's hard to kind of just have a strong government, because I can't just call my government officials and tell them, by the way, this is what I want you to do. I'm the king to do it. We have to send letters. We have to send people to communicate. And that takes time. That takes weeks and months. So the government's not going to be strong because you can't communicate well with your government officials. And then, like I said, there's going to be a lot of military action. Egypt was being conquered by other people. Other people were conquering, or Egypt was conquering other people themselves. I mean, there's just a lot of back and forth military actions, and this is never going to be great for a nation. So that is the period of the Middle Kingdom. But eventually, we do hit a more prosperous kingdom after a couple of, hundreds of years, and we call this more prosperous area the New Kingdom. So these kingdoms are kind of like a sandwich. The prosperous bread on either side, the not so great Middle Kingdom in the middle. So now let's watch a short video clip about the New Kingdom. And during the New Kingdom, we're going to hear more about old religious practices. We're going to see a lot of shift in that. We're going to see where the government comes back more strong, more rich, but there are going to be changes that go on. And then this is where we're also going to start talking about specific pharaohs. So specific pharaohs who made decisions that were important to Egyptian history. Okay, so here we go with the video clip for the New Kingdom.
Conquering and being conquered, Egypt eventually emerged from its geographically imposed isolationism and... Can we cue the New Kingdom graphic, please? There it is. New Kingdom Egypt continued this military expansion, but it looked more like an empire, particularly when they headed south and took over land in an attempt to find gold and slaves. Probably the most expansive of the New Kingdom pharaohs was Hatshepsut, a woman who ruled Egypt for about 22 years and who expanded Egypt not through military might, but through trade. But most New Kingdom pharaohs, being dudes, focused on military expansion, which brought Egypt into conflicts with the Assyrians, who you'll remember from last week, and then the Persians, Persians, and then Alexander the Great, and finally the Romans. On the whole, Egypt probably would have been better off enjoying its geographical isolation and not trying to conquer new territory, but all of Egypt's friends had jumped off a bridge, so. One last thing about the New Kingdom. There was this crazy New Kingdom pharaoh named Akhenaten who tried to invent a new god for Egypt. Aten. Akhenaten was kind of the Kim Jong-il of ancient Egypt. Like, he had this feared police force and this big cult of personality, and also he was a nut job. Anyway, after his death, he was replaced by his wife, and then a daughter, and then a son, Tutankhaten, who turned his back on the weird god Aten and changed his name to Tutankhamun. And that is about all King Tut did before he died, probably around the age of 17. Honestly, the only reason King Tut is famous is that most pharaohs had their graves robbed by ancient people, and King Tut had his grave robbed by 20th century British. John Green. King Tut leads us nicely to the really crucial thing about Egyptian culture, because King Tut lived right around the same time as the pyramids, right? Wrong. Remember, the pyramids were built around 2500 BCE during the Old Kingdom. King Tut died in 1322 BCE, 1200 years later. That's 5.5 Americas, but because Egypt was so similar for so long, it all tends to blend together when we imagine it. Ancient Egypt lasted 1,000 years longer than Christianity has been around, and 800 years longer than that other super long-lived civilization, China. So there was an entire culture that lasted longer than Western civilization has existed, and it had run its course before the West was even born.
Alright guys, so in this video, we learned more about the New Kingdom and about how it changed and it did shift around a lot in its ideas and in its views, as well as gaining more territory and becoming more of an empire than just a small civilization. Now when we talked about old religious practices in Egypt, remember we said that they were polytheistic, they believed in more than one god, that was just kind of their thing. But there was a pharaoh who does come on the scene a little bit later. He abolished the old religious practice of worshiping multiple gods, and he said there was one God, and his name was Akhenaten. Okay? Very good. So just an overview of the New Kingdom. Remember, it is a very prosperous time. It's actually referred to as Egypt's golden age because it was very prosperous. There's great art, great kings. And remember, it was a big shift from the Middle Kingdom, which was a time of war and a time of conquering nations. So we're going back to the time, or getting to a time where Egypt becomes more prosperous. Now, during this time, there were two important pharaohs, Tutankhamun and Ramses II, who we will talk about more in detail in later lessons. But the New Kingdom does eventually come to an end due to invasions and rule by foreign dynasties, and that's going to be the end of the three kingdoms. That's not going to be the end of Egypt, because Egypt is still a country today. But as far as a big empire, big civilization, that's where it's going to come to an end, and you're going to see more about that in your lessons in the next couple of days. Now, going back to the religion in the New Kingdom, remember, religion plays an important role in government decisions at this time because people believe that, their religious practices were ruled by the different gods and goddesses they believed in. So before this guy, Akhenaten, remember, everybody was polytheistic. They had multiple gods that they worshipped. And also the capital of Egypt was determined by great religious decisions. So the capital of the nation was called Thebes, and it was the capital because that was the center of their religious activity. And so again, religion was going to play a role in their government. But during the reign of Akhenaten, this guy, this pharaoh, he believed that everybody should just worship one god. The god was going to be called Aten, and he was a sun god. And so he basically made it illegal to worship more than one god. He said everybody had to worship the god that he worshipped, and so he would punish them if they didn't. And he made this decision, and of course, it's not going to take hold right away. People are going to, kind of rebel and fight back against it. And so it was a period of turmoil. He even moved the capital out of Thebes because of the new religion, and he moved it to a place in the desert that he actually named after himself, called Akhenaten. Excuse me, Akhenaten. And so that was his, contribution to Egyptian history, as he tried to change religious beliefs and practices, but of course, not everybody was on board. So that was the most important thing that he was known for. People thought he was kind of crazy for it, but they would never say that to his face. But after he did pass away, A series, of short rulers came on the scene, but his son eventually took over. Now, his son was not called Tutankhamun to begin with. He changed his name, but Tutankhamun was the ruler after Akhenaten. Akhenaten, excuse me, I keep saying that wrong. Akhenaten. He was the ruler, and he ruled after Akhenaten's death. It was actually kind of interesting because he was 9 years old when he became the ruler of Egypt, and nobody thought anything about that. He was still the ruler. But in this time, he did reestablish the old religious order. So he reestablished the idea that there are multiple gods and everybody should be polytheistic. He moved the capital back to the religious center, Thebes. And so he basically just righted all of the strange things that his dad did before him. That is before, during, and after Akhenaten's rule. So let's talk a little bit more about this guy, Tutankhamun. In today's period, we sometimes abbreviate his name to King Tut. If you can't pronounce Tutankhamun, that's okay. And Tutankhamun didn't do a lot of super important things. He didn't do, he did some great things. I mean, he was a great ruler in a way, but his most important contribution actually comes after his death, because his tomb was the first ever royal tomb that was found intact, meaning that people had not robbed it and stolen stuff from it in the thousands of years since he died. Basically, in the thousands of years since he died, it was the same. It had remained the same. And so that's super important in this case, because we learned a lot from those possessions that were still there when his tomb was discovered. We would not have been able to learn as much if people had stolen those possessions. So that's super important for us. So his tomb, when it was first discovered by Howard Carter, it gave us a lot of idea about what life was like in ancient Egypt because of what was in there. But we do know a few things about Tutankhamun and his reign. We do know that he moved the capital back to Thebes. He removed images of Akhenaten, his father, from temples because he just thought that his dad was a little bit crazy in the decisions that he made. He became the king at the age of 9, but he did die around 19, so he didn't rule for long, and he didn't age very far because he died around 19 because he wasn't very healthy. Because honestly, he was kind of inbred. Like his mom and dad were closely related to each other. Most likely, they were brother and sister, and the brother and sister had a baby, and it was the king. And of course, we kind of bat our eyes at that, and we're like, that's not right. But in this time period, their belief was that the royal family was chosen by the gods. So again, all their decisions are based off of what the gods want. And so they have to keep it all in the family. They can't just bring in an outsider to be mom or dad. They have to keep it all in the family. So that's what they believe. So of course, he's going to have a lot of health concerns because of that, those issues. And so he did pass away. But he did reestablish the old religion before he went away, and so for many, many years after his death, people were back to being polytheistic and believing in more than one god. Now here is a pretty interesting kind of overview or picture of his burial chamber. So here's where the body was found when his tomb was discovered, and in relation to his body, there were different rooms that contained all of these riches and all of these rich possessions of gold and jewels and things like that they believed he would need in his afterlife. So he was buried with all of his worldly possessions. So just a quick question to check for understanding: which of the following statements apply to the New Kingdom? The answer would be E, because B and C are correct. King Tut becomes pharaoh only after his father Akhenaten, sorry guys, attempts to revolutionize religion by changing it. I cannot understand why that name is not flowing off my tongue today. But only after Akhenaten attempts to revolutionize religion does King Tut become pharaoh afterwards. If you're looking at answer choice A actually describes the Old Kingdom because the pyramids were built and the embalming process or mummifying bodies was created. All right. So that was all for today. And again, I apologize if you were in class earlier that there was problems with the videos, but thanks for watching, and y'all have a great day.